My daughter-in-law emptied my safe while I was burying my son. $145,000, 30 years of saving, of skipping vacations, of choosing the store brand, of saying no to myself every time I wanted to say yes. Gone. And when my granddaughter asked where Grandpa's money went, Renata told her, "Grandpa won't need it anymore." Some people who have heard this story think I went too far with what I did next. I want you to decide for yourself. Let me tell you how we got here, because none of this started the day I stood in that bank manager's office holding a folder I wasn't prepared for. It started years before that. It started the day my son Daniel brought Renata Lucero home for Sunday dinner, and she looked at our kitchen, the chipped tile counter, the second-hand table, the window that stuck in summer, and smiled the way a person smiles when they're cataloging a room, not enjoying it. I noticed. I always noticed. I just never said anything because Daniel loved her, and Daniel was my son, and for a long time, loving him meant making room for the parts of his life I didn't understand. My name is Nora Scott. I am 41 years old. When Daniel died, a stroke, sudden, the kind that doesn't give you time to prepare even though you spend your whole life knowing that someday something will come for the people you love, he was 38. He left behind a wife, a daughter named Cora who had just turned 6, and a mother who had been quietly building something for years that nobody in that family knew about. Daniel knew. He was proud of it. We talked about it the Thursday before he died, sitting in the parking lot of the hospital where he just had his routine checkup, both of us eating sandwiches because parking was cheaper than the cafeteria. He said, "Mom, you know you don't have to keep living like this." I said, "I know." He said, "Then why?" I said, "Because I like knowing it's there." He laughed and stole the pickle off my sandwich, and we sat there in the October sun, and I didn't know it was one of the last times I'd hear him laugh. That was October 9th, 2023. He died October 22nd. And by November 3rd, 11 days after we put him in the ground, the safe in my bedroom closet was empty. I grew up in a family that talked about money the way other families talk about religion, constantly, anxiously, and with a conviction that there was never enough. My mother, Linda Scott, kept every receipt in a shoebox under the bed. My father worked at a machine shop for 31 years and retired with a pension that covered his medication and not much else. I watched them count coins at the kitchen table more times than I can say, and I made myself a promise when I was about 12 years old that I would never be that afraid. That promise drove everything. I put myself through 2 years of community college working the overnight shift at a fulfillment center, then transferred to finish my accounting degree. By 26, I was a licensed CPA. By 29, I had a small but steady book of clients, small business owners, a few medical practices, a restaurant group that kept terrible records and needed someone patient enough to untangle them. By 32, I had paid off my student loans and bought a small house in Millbrook, the kind of neighborhood where people know each other's names but don't ask too many questions. I drove a 12-year-old Corolla. I wore sensible clothes. I brought my lunch to work in a canvas bag from a conference I'd attended in 2015. I did not do this to deceive anyone. I did it because it was practical, because I had grown up understanding that visible money invites visible opinions, and because the truth is that I simply did not care about the performance of wealth. What I cared about was the substance of it. When Daniel married Renata in July of 2015, I was 30 years old and had already accumulated a real estate investment that nobody in the family knew about, a duplex in Caldwell that I'd purchased quietly through an LLC 3 years earlier. It generated steady rental income. I had a financial advisor named George Acaffer who helped me reinvest it systematically. I was building something. Slowly, deliberately, the way you build anything that's meant to last. Renata came from a family that believed wealth was something you displayed, not accumulated. Her mother, Dolores Lucero, wore her jewelry to breakfast. Her brother drove a car that cost more than my first 2 years of college combined. They were not bad people, necessarily. They were just people for whom status was oxygen. You breathed it in, you breathed it out, you couldn't imagine living without it. The first time Dolores came to my house, she asked if I was on some kind of waiting list for a larger place. I told her I was comfortable. She gave me a look that I would come to know well over the years, a look that landed somewhere between pity and relief, the look of a person who needs to believe that the people around them are slightly less fortunate than they are. I didn't correct her. I opened my laptop that evening and reviewed my investment summary with George. The Caldwell property had just been revalued at $214,000. I went to bed feeling fine. The second incident was at Cora's first birthday party, January 2017. I had brought a gift that I'd spent real thought on, a handmade quilt from a woman in our town who did beautiful work, and a savings bond I'd registered in Cora's name as the first deposit toward a college fund I intended to build for her. Renata opened the quilt, smiled with her mouth, and set it aside. She held up the savings bond and said, "Oh, how sweet," in the tone you use for things you plan to put in a drawer and forget about. Dollars leaned over and said, "Nora, you really shouldn't have," which under the circumstances was the most accurate thing she said all day. What none of them knew was that I had already opened a 529 account for Cora through my firm, and the savings bond was just the opening gesture. Over the next 6 years, I would contribute to that account every single quarter without fail, reinvesting the growth, letting it sit and compound the way patient money does. By October of 2023, Cora's college fund held $68,000. I was the account owner and sole trustee. Renata had never been named on it. Neither had Daniel. At his request, he had said, with a grin, "Keep it in your hands, Mom. You're better at this than I'll ever be." He was not wrong. The third incident I'll mention is a dinner at Dolar's house in March of 2021. I had recently closed on a second property, a small commercial unit in the same district as the duplex, which I had been watching for 2 years waiting for the right price. I paid cash. It was not a casual decision. I had worked for it, planned for it, and executed it exactly as George and I had discussed. I sat at Dolar's dinner table that Sunday eating her excellent rice and beans and listening to her tell me about a part-time bookkeeping position that had opened up at her church's administrative office. "It wouldn't be much," she said, "but for someone in your situation, it might be nice to have something a little more stable." My situation. I had cleared $162,000 in net income the previous year. I told her I appreciated her thinking of me. I excused myself to use the restroom and sent George a brief message asking him to confirm the paperwork on the commercial unit was filed correctly. He confirmed it within 10 minutes. I came back to the table and had a second serving of rice and listened to Dollars explain the importance of financial security to a woman who had been securing her finances since before Dollars knew my name. Daniel caught my eye across the table. He pressed his lips together the way he always did when he was trying not to laugh. I gave him the smallest possible nod. We understood each other completely. Those are the 3 incidents I'll give you, because they set the pattern, and the pattern is what matters. I was consistently underestimated by the people my son had married into, and I consistently chose not to correct them, because the corrections would come eventually, and I preferred to control the timing. But the year before Daniel died, something shifted. Not in Renata, exactly, she had always been what she was. What shifted was the behavior, the frequency of it, the way it began to extend beyond condescension and into something that felt more pointed, more deliberate. She started making comments about my house in front of Cora. Small ones, the kind a child absorbs without fully understanding. "Grandma's house is cozy," she'd say, in the voice that means small. Or she'd arrive for a Sunday visit and look around and say, "Have you thought about updating the floors? There are affordable options now." Not cruelty, exactly. Just a slow, steady pressure, the kind designed to make you feel like you're being done a favor by being tolerated. I noticed the way Cora began to look at my house when they arrived together. A slight hesitation at the door. A quick glance at her mother before deciding how to feel. Children learn their opinions from the people around them. I was watching my granddaughter being taught to see me as lesser, and I was keeping account of every single instance, even when I smiled and changed the subject and made the hot chocolate Cora liked with the little marshmallows. Even then I was counting. And that was just the beginning. 14 months before Daniel died, I had my first meeting with my estate attorney, Raymond Cho. That was August of 2022. I had worked with Raymond's firm before. They had handled the LLC documents for my first property, but this was different. This was a full review of everything I had built, and a conversation about what I wanted to happen to it. We met at his office on a Tuesday morning, and I brought a folder with everything organized exactly the way an accountant organizes things, which is to say that Raymond told me afterward it was one of the most complete intake packets he had received in 15 years of practice. We talked for 2.5 hours. We talked about the properties, about the college fund, about the cash savings I had accumulated over the years, some in traditional investment accounts, some in physical form in the safe at home, which I know sounds old-fashioned, but there is a particular kind of peace that comes from knowing that a portion of what you have built exists in a form that requires someone to physically come to where you live in order to take it from you. That peace, as it turned out, was not as permanent as I had believed. Raymond and I structured everything carefully. The duplex and the commercial unit were already held in the LLC, which had its own operating agreement and beneficiary designations. The college fund named me as trustee with a successor trustee designation in case something happened to me. We drafted an updated will with very specific language about Cora, my biological granddaughter, Daniel's daughter, and what I intended for her. The will did not name Renata in any capacity. It named a trust structure designed to benefit Cora directly, with distributions controlled by a trustee until Cora reached the age of 25. I did not tell Daniel the specific numbers. He knew the general shape of things, and he approved of it. What I did not tell him, because I did not want to have a conversation that would force him to choose between loyalty to his mother and loyalty to his wife, was that I had specifically and intentionally excluded Renata from every document I had ever signed. Raymond said, at the end of our second meeting in October of 2022, "You've been very thorough." I told him I'd been building this for a long time. He looked at his notes and said, "Nora, just for my own peace of mind, does anyone in your family know the scope of this?" I said no. He nodded slowly, the way attorneys nod when they're pleased and trying not to show it. He said, "Then I'd keep it that way for now." I kept it that way. The spring of 2023, I had 2 close calls that I will tell you about because they show you how close the whole thing came to the surface before the right moment. The first was in April. Renata had come over to drop Cora off for the weekend. Daniel was traveling for work, and Cora liked staying with me, which I cherished without ever making a production of it. While Cora was in the backyard looking at the neighbor's cat through the fence, Renata walked through my living room the way she sometimes did, not quite browsing, not quite respecting the boundary between visitor and owner. She paused at the small desk near the window where I sometimes worked from home and looked at a folder I had left there, not carelessly. I had left it there specifically because it contained nothing sensitive, just the previous month's utility statements. But next to it, underneath my coffee cup, was a sticky note in my own handwriting that said, "Ask Raymond Ray, Trust Amendment, Cora Age Distribution Clause." She looked at it. I watched her eyes move across the words. I was standing in the kitchen doorway, completely still. "What's this?" she said, in the casual voice that means she very much wants to know. "Just something for work," I said. "I do trust administration for several clients." She looked at the note again, then at me. "Raymond is your attorney?" "Raymond Cho is an estate attorney whose firm I refer clients to sometimes," I said, which was technically accurate in a way that required no elaboration. She tilted her head. Her hand went to her earring, a small gold hoop, and she turned at once, the way she always did when she was deciding whether to press further. She didn't press. "You work too hard," she said, moving away from the desk and toward the back door to collect Cora. I picked up my coffee cup, folded the sticky note into my pocket, and released a breath I had been holding for approximately 90 seconds. That evening, I called Raymond and asked him to expedite the amendment we had been discussing. He said he would have it ready within 3 weeks. I said I'd appreciate 2. He said he'd see what he could do. The amendment was signed on May 14, 2023, in his office with a notary present, with every distribution schedule specified exactly as I had wanted it. The second close call was in July, at a cookout at Dolar's house. The extended Lucero family was there, aunts, cousins, a grandmother visiting from out of town, and the conversation turned, as it sometimes does at these gatherings, to real estate. One of Renata's cousins, a man named Felix who sold insurance and had strong opinions about investment property, began talking about the Caldwell neighborhood, about how prices were rising, about how a duplex in that corridor could probably pull in strong rental income. I was standing near the drinks table, holding a lemonade, listening. "Do you know that area, Nora?" Dolars asked, pulling me into the conversation with the particular tone she used when she expected me to say no. "A little," I said. "Felix thinks it's a great investment corridor," she said. "It is," I said. Felix looked at me. "You looking to invest over there?" "I've had some interest in the area," I said, which was the truest thing I had said all afternoon. Dolars laughed a small, comfortable laugh. Well, if you ever get serious about it, Felix knows people. She patted my arm. It takes real capital to move in that market, not something you want to rush into. I nodded and said I'd keep that in mind. Daniel, standing 4 feet to my left, made a sound that could have been a cough or a laugh, and I looked at him briefly and he looked at his shoes and I looked back at Dollars and said, I appreciate the advice. On the drive home, Daniel said, You were incredible back there. I said, I've had practice. He said, Mom, one day. I said, I know, not yet. He nodded. He didn't push. He understood that the timing mattered as much as the truth. That was the last summer cookout we would have together. Everything I had built, the properties, the trust, the college fund, the savings in the safe, the documented and notarized and professionally managed architecture of everything I had quietly constructed over 30 years, was about to be tested. Not at a dinner table, not at a family gathering, but in the most unimaginable circumstances I could have been handed. Because 6 weeks after that cookout, Daniel had his stroke, and 11 days after I buried my son, I stood in the hallway of my own home and opened the closet door and looked at a safe that was supposed to hold $145,000 in cash savings, and instead found the door hanging open. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Or maybe, as I would come to understand in the days that followed, it was exactly perfect. The safe door was open about 3 inches. I remember that detail clearly, not swung wide, not torn off, just open the precise amount that told me someone had taken their time. Someone who knew the combination. Someone who had stood in my bedroom closet in my house while I was standing at a graveside 6 miles away and methodically removed every banded envelope I had kept in there for 30 years. I stood in the hallway for a long moment. Not frozen. Not in shock exactly. Something cooler than shock. I had the sensation of a calculation running in the back of my mind before my conscious thoughts had caught up, adding, subtracting, rerouting. Then I went to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and called Raymond Cho. It was a Tuesday morning, November 3rd, 2023. 11 days after Daniel's funeral. Cora was at school. Renata had insisted on getting her back to routine, which I had agreed with at the time and would later understand was about more than routine. I had come home from a coffee with a neighbor who had brought me a casserole and stayed too long, and I had almost not gone to the closet at all. I had almost gone straight to my desk to catch up on the work that had accumulated while I was not working. Almost. Raymond's assistant put me through in under a minute. He had been expecting something from me, not this, specifically, but something. Grief does unpredictable things to families, and he had been practicing long enough to know it. The safe was emptied, I told him. A pause, then, when? Sometime in the last 11 days, I was at the funeral, Cora was at school, Renata had a key to the house. Did she have the combination? I thought about it. I had never given it to her directly, but Daniel had known it. And Daniel's phone, his unlocked phone, which I had handed to Renata myself at the hospital the night he died so she could notify his contacts, had a notes app. I had watched him type things into that notes app. I was not careful about it. I believe she may have found it, I said. Raymond was quiet for a moment. I could hear him thinking. Nora, what was in the safe? $145,000 in cash, my passport, a copy of my will, not the original, just a copy, and Daniel's birth certificate. Okay, another pause. Did you touch the safe? I opened the door slightly further to confirm it was empty. I haven't touched anything else. Good, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, call the police. This is a felony theft, and you need a report on file before anything else happens. Second, do not contact Renata. Not a text, not a call, nothing. Third, get to my office this afternoon. Can you do all 3? Yes, I said. Call the police first, then call me back with a case number. I hung up and called 911. 2 officers arrived within 40 minutes. They were professional and thorough. They photographed the safe, photographed the closet, took my statement. When I told them I believed my daughter-in-law, my son's widow, who was not related to me by blood, who had no legal right to anything in my home, had accessed the safe while I was at my son's funeral, one of the officers, a woman named Officer Diane Reyes, wrote very carefully in her notebook without looking up. Do you have any evidence she was in the property? She asked. She has a key to my house, I said. She has had it for 4 years because Daniel asked me to give her one in case of emergency. I didn't change it when Daniel died because I was focused on other things. That was my error. Any cameras? I told her I had a doorbell camera. She asked me how to access the footage. We stood together in my front hallway and I pulled up the app on my phone, and there it was. November 1st, 2023, at 11:47 in the morning, 2 days after the funeral, Renata's silver Honda Pilot in my driveway. Renata walking to my door. Renata using a key. Renata inside my house for 31 minutes. Renata leaving with a canvas tote bag that was clearly heavier going out than it had been going in. Officer Reyes looked at the footage, then at me. "We'll need a copy of that," she said. I sent it to her directly from the app. She gave me a case number. She told me someone from the detective division would follow up within 48 hours, and that based on the footage and the amount, this would be treated as grand theft. She said those words exactly, clearly, with no softening, grand theft. I thanked her, closed the door behind them, and sat back down at the kitchen table. It was not grief that I felt sitting there. It wasn't rage either, though I want to be honest, the rage was present. It was simply standing in a corner of the room where I could see it, and I was choosing not to let it drive. What I felt, primarily, was a terrible clarity. The kind that comes when something you suspected at a low level has been confirmed at full volume. Renata had stood in my bedroom closet while I was burying my son and taken everything she could carry. And she had sent my 6-year-old granddaughter home from school that same week with a story. I know about the story because Cora told me herself, 3 days after the theft, when I picked her up from school for our standing Wednesday afternoon. She climbed into my car, buckled her seatbelt, and said, with the specific careful tone children use when they are reporting something an adult told them to report, "Mommy says Grandpa left you some stuff, but you gave it to her to keep safe." I kept my hands on the steering wheel. I kept my voice level. "Did Mommy say that?" "Yeah." A pause. "She says you said it was okay." I nodded slowly. "Cora, do you remember when we made those chocolate chip cookies last month and I put the extra ones in the blue tin?" She nodded. "And what did I say about those cookies?" "You said they were for us, you and me." "Right, so if someone came to my house and took the tin while I was out, would that be okay?" She thought about this with the thoroughness that 6-year-olds apply to hypotheticals. "No," she decided, "because you said." "Right," I said again. "You're a smart kid." She seemed satisfied with this and asked if we could stop for hot chocolate. We stopped for hot chocolate. I kept the conversation ordinary and warm, and when I dropped her back at Renata's apartment that evening, I looked at Renata standing in the doorway of the apartment she was now renting because she and Daniel had been renting too. I had not known this. Daniel had not mentioned it. It came out in the days after his death, and I looked at her and I smiled and said, "She had a good afternoon." And Renata said, "Thank you, Nora," in the warm voice she used when she was comfortable. She was comfortable because she thought I didn't know. I drove home and called Raymond. "File everything," I told him. "We're going with the original timeline, all of it. Including the formal demand letter?" "Including the formal demand letter. And Raymond, I want to know what Renata's financial situation actually looks like, whatever we can legally access. I'll have someone start on that tomorrow morning. I also need you to check something for me." When Renata took those items from my safe, she took a copy of my will, not the original, but she saw it. I need to know how that affects anything. Raymond was quiet for a moment. "The copy she saw is outdated. We amended in May. The document she has doesn't reflect the current trust structure." I let that sit for a second. "So she made a decision about what to take," I said slowly, "based on a document that doesn't show what she thinks it shows." "That appears to be the case." I was still for a long moment. Then, "Good, let's let her believe that for a while. If you are still with me, stay, because what I did in the next 3 weeks is the reason I am telling you this story at all." The detective who followed up on my case was named Detective Carl Embeke. He was methodical. He returned calls promptly, and he took the footage from my doorbell camera, along with the financial records Raymond's office had prepared showing exactly what had been in the safe. I had maintained a running log of the cash deposits as part of my own accounting practice, which meant I had years of documented entries that corresponded to the amount stolen. Raymond's paralegal had pulled together a package that, in Detective Embeke's words, was unusually complete. Grand theft charges were formally filed against Renata on November 21st, 2023. She was arrested, processed, and released on bail the same day. I know this because Raymond called me that afternoon and told me. I did not allow myself to feel satisfaction about it in that moment. There was still too much to do. What I had not yet addressed, what Raymond and I were building toward in those 3 weeks of preparation, was not the criminal matter. The police and the district attorney's office were handling that. What I was building toward was the civil matter, the full accounting of what Renata had taken or attempted to take, and the protection of everything that was meant for Cora. Because here is what Detective EMPTIED found when he and Raymond's investigator began looking at Renata's financial situation together. Renata had not acted alone in the immediate aftermath of Daniel's death. She had also, in the 9 days between Daniel dying and the funeral, made 3 calls to Daniel's former employer about what she described as outstanding life insurance benefits, giving herself as the sole beneficiary. She had made 2 calls to a bank where Daniel had a small joint checking account, attempting to remove my name from emergency contact designations. And she had contacted a real estate agent about the possibility of listing a property, my property, the duplex in Caldwell, based, apparently, on a misreading of something in the copy of the old will she had either found or been given access to before Daniel died. None of these attempts had succeeded. The life insurance correctly named Cora as primary beneficiary through a policy Daniel had updated 2 years earlier. The bank had flagged the calls. The real estate agent, to his credit, had asked for ownership documentation that Renata could not produce, but the pattern was clear and Detective EMPTIED understood the pattern. "We're looking at more than the theft," he told Raymond. "Yes," Raymond said, "we are. I had one more thing to do before the confrontation that was coming. I needed to tell Dollars, not because I owed it to her, not because I thought she would take my side, I had no expectation of that. I needed to tell Dollars because Cora's pediatric appointments, including the ongoing sessions with a developmental specialist named Dr. Anna Flores that Cora had been seeing every 6 weeks for a mild speech delay, were currently routed through a health insurance plan under Dollars' family policy. Daniel had arranged it. I had not known until I received an explanation of benefits statement 2 weeks after the funeral. If Renata's situation became unstable, and it was about to, I needed to know whether Cora's coverage was at risk. I called Dollars on the morning of November 24th. She answered on the second ring. "Nora," her voice was warm in the careful way it always was, not cold, never cold, just managed. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I said. "Dollars, I need to ask you something directly. I hope you'll hear me out before responding." A pause. "Of course. Are you aware that Renata came to my house while I was at Daniel's funeral and removed $145,000 in cash from my safe?" The pause this time was different, longer. I listened to it carefully. "Nora, I don't," she stopped, started again. "I don't know anything about that." I believed her, not because Dollars was above dishonesty, but because her particular brand of self-deception required ignorance. She needed not to know the things that would force her to choose. "There are criminal charges," I told her, "filed last week." I wanted you to hear it from me before it became something you heard about another way. "Criminal charges." She repeated it the way you repeat something when your brain hasn't finished processing it. "Yes, I'm also concerned about Cora's insurance coverage through your family policy. I need to know if that's going to be stable in the coming months. Cora has specialist appointments. I won't let those be disrupted." Silence. Then, quietly, "I had no idea." "I know," I said. "I believe that. But I need you to understand that I am going to handle this completely, and I am going to protect Cora completely, and I would appreciate your cooperation in making sure she doesn't lose her medical coverage while this is being sorted out." Dollars said she would make sure of it. Her voice was different by the end of the call. The managed warmth was gone, replaced by something flatter, more tired. She asked me twice if I was sure about the charges. I told her I was sure and that I had doorbell footage and that the district attorney agreed. She said, "My God, Nora." I said, "Yes." We hung up. 3 days later, Renata called me. She had clearly just spoken with her mother. "I think we need to talk," she said. Her voice was controlled, but there was a thread running through it, pulled taut. "I think so too," I said. "Come to my house Saturday morning, 10 o'clock. Can't we just Saturday, 10 o'clock? I kept my voice even. "Bring your attorney if you have one." "I'll have mine present." She didn't answer for a moment. Then, "Okay." I spent the rest of that week preparing for Saturday morning, and preparing is not a strong enough word. Raymond and I met twice. His associate, a sharp young attorney named Lysette Park, prepared a complete summary of the civil claims. The detective's case file was referenced but not shared. That was the DA's territory. What we were presenting Saturday was the civil side, the documented theft, the pattern of attempted financial interference, and the question of Cora. Because Renata, by the time Saturday arrived, was going to understand something she did not currently understand. She had taken $145,000 thinking it was the most valuable thing in that closet. She was wrong by a very large margin. The look on her face when she finally understood that I had 4 days to think about what it would look like. I was not wrong about any of it. Renata arrived at 9:58. She was dressed carefully, which told me she had thought hard about this meeting. She had her mother with her, which I had not expected but which did not surprise me on reflection. Dollars walked 2 steps behind Renata coming up the front path, her posture rigid, her hands clasped in front of her. Raymond was already seated at my kitchen table with Lisette. He had coffee. Lisette had a legal pad and a pen she held very still. I opened the door. Renata. I stepped back to let them in. Dollars. Dollars looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, undisguised apprehension. She was reading the room the second she walked into it, the 2 attorneys, the organized folders on the table, the complete absence of anything informal or domestic about the setup. Her hand went to her necklace immediately, a heavy gold chain Daniel had told me once cost more than his first car. I offered coffee. Dollars said yes. Renata said nothing, just sat down across from Raymond and looked at the folders. You brought attorneys, Renata said. Raymond looked up from his notes. Raymond Cho, I'm Nora's estate attorney. He nodded toward Lisette. This is Lisette Park, my associate. She's been handling the civil documentation. Renata's gaze moved to Lisette, then back to me. I thought this was going to be a conversation. It is a conversation, I said. I sat down, folded my hands on the table. A very specific one. Did you bring anyone from your side? I didn't think. She stopped. Her attorney had apparently told her to bring someone because the hesitation was the hesitation of someone who had ignored advice. I came with my mother. Dollars sat down next to Renata and said nothing. She was looking at the folders. That's fine, I said. Let's begin. Raymond opened the first folder and laid a single sheet on the table. The summary from Detective Mbicky's case file, the civil version, documenting the doorbell footage, the timeline, the amounts. On November 1st, 2023, Raymond said, in the measured voice of a man who has given difficult news many times, at 11:47 in the morning, you entered this property using a key. You accessed the safe in the master bedroom closet. You removed $145,000 in cash, along with a passport and certain personal documents. You were on the property for 31 minutes. Renata's expression didn't change. She had been preparing for this part. She had an answer ready. Daniel told me about the safe. He said if anything ever happened to him and there was a family emergency, Daniel died on October 22nd, Raymond said. The access occurred 11 days later. What was the family emergency on November 1st? A pause. 2 seconds, then 3. I was trying to make sure Cora was provided for, Renata said. Her voice was very even. I didn't know what Nora's plans were. I didn't know if I could count on her. I let that sit for a moment because I wanted it to sit. Then, you took $145,000 from my safe and you told my 6-year-old granddaughter that Grandpa didn't need it anymore. Those were your words to a 6-year-old child. Renata's composure cracked, not shattered, just cracked, a hairline fracture at the corner of her composure. She looked down at the table. I was handling a difficult moment badly. I shouldn't have said that. No, I agreed. You shouldn't have, Dollars spoke for the first time. Her voice was low, careful. Renata, you didn't tell me it was this much. Renata cut her a look that had years of something in it. Dollars pressed her lips together and looked at the table. Raymond placed a second sheet on the table. There's also the matter of the 3 calls made to Pacific Life Insurance in the week following Daniel's death. You represented yourself as the sole beneficiary of Daniel's life insurance policy. Renata looked at the sheet. I was just inquiring about the process. You stated to the representative on November 1st that you were the sole beneficiary and asked to initiate a claim. Lisette turned her legal pad and showed it across the table. This is a transcript of that call. The representative documented it. The policy names Cora as primary beneficiary. You are not named on the policy. Renata looked at the transcript. Something behind her eyes shifted, a calculation recalibrating. Her hand moved toward the paper, then didn't touch it. I made an error, she said finally. I didn't know the policy had been updated. When did you believe it was last updated? Raymond asked. She didn't answer. Raymond placed the third sheet, a copy of the life insurance policy, with Daniel's update date clearly visible, November 14th, 2021, 2 full years before his death. The color started to leave Renata's face, not dramatically. Gradually, the way color leaves things when you're not watching closely. You're trying to make it look like I was, she started. We're not trying to make it look like anything, I said. These are the documented facts, and they are separate from the criminal matter, which is being handled by the district attorney's office. This morning is about the civil questions. Specifically, what you took, what you attempted to take, and what is going to happen now. Dollars reached across and touched Renata's arm. Renata moved her arm away. What criminal matter? Dollars said, looking at me directly. This was the part she had not fully absorbed from our phone call, or the part she had been hoping was exaggerated. Grand theft charges were filed on November 21st, Raymond said. The criminal case is proceeding separately. Our concern here is the civil resolution and primarily the question of Cora. Dollars' hand went back to her necklace. She turned the chain once, slowly. Renata looked at me. Her voice came out different now, not the controlled, prepared version she'd arrived with, but something rower underneath it. I'm her mother. Whatever you think of me, I'm her mother. You can't use Cora against me. I'm not using Cora against you, I said. I'm protecting Cora from the collateral damage of what you've done. Those are not the same thing. Raymond took the next folder, the thicker one, the one Lysette had spent 2 days assembling, and opened it at the center of the table. Nora, would you like to walk through this? I would. Renata, I said, when you accessed my safe, you found a copy of my will, an older copy from 2022. I believe you made decisions based on what you read in that document. I'd like to show you what you didn't know. Renata's posture tightened. That was the first full-body reaction, not a single gesture, her whole body settling into a defensive stillness, like an animal that has decided not to run. I placed the amended trust document, the May 2023 amendment, in front of her. Lysette walked her through the key sections quietly, professionally, without drama. The trust structure for Cora, the college fund. The properties held in the LLC, not in my personal name, not in any document Renata had seen, but in a business entity that predated her marriage to Daniel by 4 years. With each page, Renata's expression shifted through small stages. Confusion first, the slight narrowing of the eyes that means the information isn't matching the model. Then something that might have been, briefly, grief, the realization that she had misunderstood the situation more completely than she had thought possible. Then something harder and colder that settled in the lines around her mouth. You have property, she said flatly. Not a question. I have a real estate portfolio, I said. I've been building it for a long time. Daniel never said. She stopped. Daniel knew the shape of it. He didn't know every number. That was intentional on my part. I didn't want him in a position where he had to choose between telling you and protecting what I'd built. She looked up at me sharply. You didn't trust me. No, I said. I didn't. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nora, Dollars said quietly from Renata's left. How much are we talking about? I looked at Dollars for a moment. She was asking in earnest, not performing, not posturing. She genuinely wanted to understand the scope of what her daughter had walked into. I thought she deserved the honest answer. The real estate is valued at approximately $420,000 in total equity across 2 properties held in the LLC. The college fund for Cora holds $68,000, which I am the sole trustee of and which Renata has never been named on. The cash in the safe, the $145,000, represents approximately 21 months of accumulated savings. And the investment accounts that George Ackhaffer manages for me are separate from all of this. Dollars set her coffee cup down very slowly, with extreme precision, as though she needed to do at least one thing carefully. You've been sitting at my dinner table, she said quietly, for 8 years. I have, I said. You told me once that the Caldwell corridor was out of reach for someone in my situation. I owned property there at the time. I didn't correct you because it wasn't the right moment. The silence that followed was complete. Renata wasn't looking at me. She was looking at a spot on the table between her hands, a fixed, focused look, the look of someone doing internal arithmetic and not liking the answers. Lysette spoke into the silence, professionally calm. Renata, the civil claim we are prepared to file encompasses the $145,000 in cash, plus damages for the documented interference with the life insurance inquiry, plus legal costs. The total civil exposure is approximately $172,000. Renata looked up. I don't have that. We know, Lysette said, which is why we're having this conversation rather than simply filing. There is a path to resolution here, but it requires cooperation on several points. Renata looked at me. Her voice came out tight and thin, stripped of its earlier confidence. What do you want? I looked at her for a long moment, not with satisfaction, exactly. With the steadiness that comes from having had this conversation in your head dozens of times and finally being in the room where it was real. I want a full restitution agreement. Every dollar returned, on a structured schedule if necessary, through the court. I want the criminal matter to proceed on its own track. That is not mine to stop, and I won't try. I want Cora's medical coverage confirmed in writing for the next 24 months, uninterrupted, while I arrange alternative coverage through her trust. And I want your cooperation with the updated custody and visitation structure that Raymond has drafted, which ensures I have consistent and legally protected access to my granddaughter. Renata stared at me. Cora is my son's daughter, I said. She is the only piece of my son I have left. I will not negotiate on that. Dolores reached over and touched Renata's arm again, and this time Renata didn't pull away. Dolores looked at me across the table, and for a moment her face held something I had never seen in 8 years of Sunday dinners and birthday parties and careful managed warmth, something like respect. She'll cooperate, Dolores said quietly. Renata's head turned sharply toward her mother. Renata. Dolores' voice was low and firm. Look at what's on that table. Look at all of it. You will cooperate. The room held that for a moment. Renata looked at the documents, then at me, then at her mother. Her hand went flat on the table, not a slap, just a placement, deliberate and final. Fine, she said. The word cost her something. I watched it cost her. Raymond and Lysette began producing the documents for signature. The preliminary agreement, the structured restitution schedule, the confirmation of medical coverage. Outside my kitchen window, the November light was doing something particular, thin and gray and very clear, the kind of light that doesn't flatter anything, but shows you everything exactly as it is. I had stopped gripping the edge of the table at some point without noticing. I realized my hands were simply resting, open, in my lap. The criminal case moved through the system over the following months. Renata was convicted on the grand theft charge in July of 2024. She received a suspended sentence and 3 years of probation, with mandatory restitution, meaning the court itself enforced what we had already agreed to civilly, which meant there were now 2 separate legal mechanisms requiring her to pay back every dollar. The restitution was structured in monthly installments. The first payment arrived in September of 2024. They have continued since, without interruption, because the alternative is violation of probation, and Renata has enough sense left to understand that. Dolores made good on her promise about the insurance. Cora's appointments with Dr. Flores continued without a single gap. By the following spring, Dr. Flores told me at Cora's last session that the speech delay had largely resolved, and she thought continued monitoring could be managed through the pediatrician. I sat in the parking lot afterward and cried for about 4 minutes, which is the most I had cried since Daniel's funeral. Then I drove home. The college fund now holds $74,000. I contribute every quarter. I am the sole trustee. Cora has no idea how much is in it yet, and she won't for many years, but she knows that Grandma has a special account for when she goes to school someday, and she told me once very seriously, I want to study animals. I told her that was an excellent plan. Renata and I do not have warmth between us. I do not expect we ever will. What we have is an agreement, and we both honor it, because we both understand what the alternative looks like. She has primary custody, and I have consistent visitation, and Cora moves between us with the resilience that children have when the adults in their lives stop performing and start being reliable. On the Wednesdays I pick her up from school, she climbs into my car and buckles her seatbelt and asks if we can stop somewhere, and we always do. My business is fine. George and I have been discussing the commercial unit. There may be a time to move it, there may not be, but the conversation is calm and unhurried. I changed the locks the day after the police visit in November of 2023. I got a new safe, a different kind, and I am considerably more careful about what I keep in it. Dolores and I do not have dinners anymore, but she called me on Daniel's birthday in April, and we talked for 22 minutes. She asked about Cora. I told her Cora was doing well. She said, good. Good. There was a long pause where I think we were both aware of everything that had happened in the previous 12 months, and neither of us had the language for it. Then she said, you were always more than we thought. And I said, yes, and we both let that be the end of it. I think about Daniel. Every day, the way you think about people who were load-bearing walls in your life, not always with sharp grief, but with a constant, low awareness of where the absence is. He would have hated all of it. He would have hated the legal proceedings and the documents and the formal language of consequences. But I think he also would have known, the way he always seemed to know, that it was necessary. That some things have to be handled completely or they follow you. This was one of those things. I handled it completely. So, was it too far or not far enough? That's a genuine question. I'd like to know what you think.